This is a presentation on taxes and their effect on the market equilibrium. Taxes are often used to change the market equilibrium when we feel that there is a situation of market failure. Market failure is an idea which we will examine in detail later on, but for the moment, first of all, let's look at how taxes actually affect the market equilibrium. The first thing to understand is that a tax is initially levied on the producer of the good and increases the cost of production. When we tax a product, we are making it more expensive for the producer to produce it, and therefore any output that the producer produces will be sold at a higher price. The effect of this is effectively to shift the supply curve, either we can call it upwards or to the left. And the vertical shift in the supply curve is the level of the tax per unit that we are placing on the product. So whenever we put a tax on something, the supply curve shifts vertically up, and the vertical shift represents the amount of the tax per unit. So let's see what this does to the market equilibrium. Let's start with an equilibrium at P0 and Q0. If we put a tax on this product, we will shift the supply curve to the left, as we have indicated, or we can call it a shift upwards, and therefore we will have a new supply curve S dash. The new equilibrium will be here at Q1, and the price will rise to P1. As we said before, the level of the tax is the vertical distance shifted by the supply curve. So what we can see is that we have placed a tax per unit, which is given by the vertical distance represented by these two arrowheads. The new equilibrium is at Q1 and the new price is at P1. Please note that the price change on the market is less than the amount of the tax. We can see that the price has only changed by this distance, which I'm showing here with these arrowheads. And this is clearly a smaller price change than the level of the tax. We will see why the price change is smaller than the level of the tax later in this presentation. So, let's see what happened again when we put the tax on this product. We can see that the supply curve shifted to the left as a result of the tax. The level of the tax was given by the vertical distance shifted by the supply curve, but the change in the price was less than the amount of the tax. P0 became P1, whereas the amount of the tax is a much greater vertical distance given by this arrowhead here. So, what affects the change in the price compared to the amount of the tax? Well, this depends on which of our curves, the demand curve or the supply curve, is more inelastic. Here we have a very inelastic demand curve. It's a very steep demand curve which shows that customers will buy roughly the same amount even if the price goes up. Now, let's see what happens when we put a tax on this product in this situation. The tax will shift the supply curve to the left. We can see that the amount of the tax will be the vertical distance given by this arrowhead here. But we can also see that the price change will be almost the same as the change in the vertical distance moved by the supply curve. So the price change here, P0 to P1, is almost the same as the level of the tax. Why? Because the demand curve is very inelastic. This means that consumers are not very sensitive to changes in the price. So when we put a tax on a product, the supplier is able to increase the price by virtually the same amount as the tax, because the supplier knows that the customers are very price inelastic. So what this graph shows is that when consumers are very price inelastic, the consumer bears the majority of any tax that we put on a product by means of an increase in price. Now let's take the opposite situation. Let's take a situation where the demand curve is very elastic. Here we can see that the demand curve is very shallow, and that means that consumer demand is very sensitive to a change in the price. Now let's see what happens when we put a tax on this product. Again, the supply curve shifts to the left. The amount of the tax is the vertical distance traveled by the supply curve at the point of the new equilibrium, which we will call Q1. But please notice that the price hardly changes at all. The price changes only a little bit from P0 to P1, even though the tax that we have put on the product is quite large. So let's draw this diagram again from scratch. First of all, we draw the two axes, quantity on this axis and price on this axis. Then we draw a very shallow demand curve, a very elastic demand curve, and a normal looking supply curve. We then put a tax on the product, causing the supply curve to shift to the left. The amount of the tax is the vertical distance traveled by the supply curve at the new equilibrium quantity. And what we can see quite clearly is that the price on the market of this product changes much less than the amount of the tax. And this is because the suppliers know that because demand is very elastic, they cannot pass on the tax to the consumer in the form of an increased price.